Intellectual property. Probably the two most divisive words when it comes to Broadway. Many think musicals based on popular brands are the death of creativity. But honestly, adaptations are nothing new. It might come as a shock, but some of the greatest musicals ever made are actually based on pre-established titles and characters. Yes, believe it or not, Andrew Lloyd Webber didn't write the line, "A cat is not a dog." Thanks, T.S. Eliot. That being said, the creative team and their approach when adapting these IPs makes all the difference in whether something is a soulless cash grab, banking in on some sweet nostalgia, or a wonderful homage that builds upon a property instead of replicating it. I'm Brendan with Wait in the Wings, and here are a couple surprising IPs that got turned into musicals. Great Scott! To get started, let's hop in the DeLorean and jump back in time to the birth of Back to the Future the musical. Based on the time-traveling blockbuster following Marty McFly and Doc Brown, the idea for a Back to the Future musical dates back to 2004, when the movie's co-screenwriter, Bob Gale, brought it up at a DeLorean Cars show.
We can't do it because we don't know how to do this kind of thing, but you know how they bring back movies as Broadway musicals? Seems like Back to the Future would make a great Broadway show. So, someday maybe that'll happen.
Turning Back to the Future into a musical wasn't the craziest idea, considering the role music played in the film and the strength of its soundtrack, with hits like Power of Love and Johnny Be Good. In a rare occurrence, the original composer for the film, Alan Silvestri, returned to compose the musical with Glenn Ballard, a record producer best known for co-writing the album Jagged Little Pill, who wrote lyrics. Together, the two created a dynamic musical score that ranged from 80s rock to 50s doo-wop, all with the same cinematic gravitas of the 1985 film. Where the musical really stands out, however, is the set design. The special effects of the original film initially wowed audiences, but the musical took it to a whole nother level. State-of-the-art LED screens, art videos, and of course, a full-scale DeLorean. As designer Tim Hatley said, it all starts with the car. To make it do exactly what they needed, the team built a DeLorean from scratch and stuffed it to the brim with technology that helps the car tip on its side, eject CO2 out of the back, and even fly. Critics raved about the set when the show opened on the West End in 2021, with David Benedict of Variety stating, "Hatley's stunning design lifts what threatened to be a movie retread into a live entertainment triumph." With a remarkable cast, breathtaking special effects, and a score more energetic than 1.21 gigawatts, Back to the Future proves that on the journey to Broadway, we don't need roads. But as if bringing a flying car to the stage wasn't hard enough, imagine bringing an entire underwater cartoon city to the real world. That's exactly what happened in 2017 with SpongeBob SquarePants the musical. On paper, this thing should have never worked. When the multi-billion-dollar company Viacom announced plans to bring SpongeBob SquarePants to Broadway, the safe bet was that it would be an unnecessary adaptation just out to make a quick buck. The concern wasn't unfounded, and was precisely why Tina Landau, an indie director from Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago, initially turned down the offer to helm the musical. But then, something surprising happened when she got an email back from her agent saying the only way Viacom would greenlight the project was if it effectively brought something new to the SpongeBob name. This spirit became the driving force for the show's creation, with David Zinn creating designs that thrived on a DIY feel. The characters wore basic clothing items that still conveyed the same feel as the TV show, without any creepy foam costumes, and Zinn littered the set with objects that would realistically sink to the ocean floor. This included boomboxes and tires, plus corals made out of hula hoops. Look at it! Isn't that awesome? In perhaps the purest example of an IP musical that embraced innovation over imitation, playwright Kyle Jarrow crafted an original, off-the-wall story that remained true to the macabre humor of the show. SpongeBob and his friends attempting to stop a volcano from destroying Bikini Bottom. The score was composed by a star-studded lineup of approximately 15 artists, including John Legend, Cyndi Lauper, Sarah Bareilles, T.I., and Panic at the Disco. With Broadway only 2 years removed from the Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark disaster, SpongeBob SquarePants the Musical showed how to do an IP musical right, and left audiences cheering it's the best day ever. But not every IP musical is this lucky, especially not Sister Act, when it opened in London 8 years earlier. Anytime you see director Jerry Zaks involved with a musical, the safe bet is that the Broadway version looks vastly different to every iteration that came before it. This happened with Smokey Joe's Cafe, it happened with The Addams Family, and in 2011, it happened with Sister Act the Musical. Earlier versions of the show already differed greatly from its cinematic inspiration. The original film follows a Reno casino singer who joins a Los Angeles convent after witnessing a murder. And even though it featured musical moments, it wasn't necessarily a musical. Still, this didn't stop the producers, including the movie's star, Whoopi Goldberg, from attempting a theatrical adaptation. Composer Alan Menken, yes, that Alan Menken, was approached to write the score, and only agreed to do it if they could lean heavier into the Motown sound present in the movie. To do this, the time period of the musical was pushed back from the 90s to the 70s, and instead of Los Angeles, it took place in South Philadelphia. Menken always wanted to write a disco score, and these changes helped make that dream a reality. Zaks first saw the show in London, and thought the score, the designs, and the actual choreography were first-rate. But the script left Zaks feeling none too happy, once describing it as aggressively unfunny. When the time came for the show to transfer from the West End to Broadway, Zaks replaced original director Peter Schneider and brought on playwright Douglas Carter Beane to bring more of the movie's humorous tone to the musical. Sister Act eventually opened in New York in 2011, as the IP Takeover reached a fever pitch. Of all the shows running on Broadway at the time of opening, roughly 41% were based on established IPs, with shows like Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, Mary Poppins, and Billy Elliot, not to mention the other unholy comedy Book of Mormon, dominating the box office. Sister Act fell off the radar. The show is far from perfect, but Alan Menken's fun, groovy score and Patina Miller's powerhouse vocals make this an easy cast album to listen to on repeat. But Sister Act isn't the only show that's dominated headphones for years. In fact, the off-Broadway musical Heathers somehow became even more popular once it closed. As crazy and sometimes cringy as Riverdale is, there's no denying that the show's got a great taste in musicals. American Psycho, Carrie, and especially with Heathers. A dark comedy about a girl dealing with the morality of her high school clique's cruelty in some pretty twisted ways, the movie Heathers was meant to be a direct contrast to the happy coming-of-age stories made popular by director John Hughes in the 80s. Heathers dove headfirst into the cynical side of high school, unapologetically sparking discussions on violence, bullying, and suicide. Much like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Heathers flopped at the box office, before eventually turning into a cult classic with a die-hard following. A following director, Andy Fickman, was a proud member of. Fickman, best known for directing the movie She's the Man, was first approached about the concept of turning Heathers into a musical in 2005. Following the trend of other popular movies at the time, the soundtrack, particularly the punk rock song Teenage Suicide Don't Do It by the fictional band Big Fun, played a big role in creating the original movie's feel. The rough edge of this song and the anti-John Hughes sentiment found its way directly into the stage show, as composers Lawrence O'Keefe and Kevin Murphy wrote one of the angstiest scores in musical theater history. This feeling worked its way into the musical story as the duo worked closely from a movie script provided by screenwriter Dan Waters, but also wasn't afraid to divert from the source material. This included updating some sections for today's social climate and creating a morbidly fascinating second act that differed greatly from the movie. Unlike the other musicals on this list, Heathers still hasn't made it to Broadway. The closest it got was a limited off-Broadway run at New World Stages in 2014. That still didn't stop the musical from becoming a cultural phenomenon. The iconic costumes, quotable lines, and dealings with very real-life struggles, not to mention a surprisingly high-def bootleg of the show, helped turn it into a TikTok sensation, basically rewriting the book on how social media can impact theater. Much like a swinging croquet racket, This show is a smash. Rewind the clock 8 years though, and things definitely weren't big fun for the Royal Shakespeare Company, which was on the verge of emotional and financial ruin. Once the biggest company of the 80s, with hits like Les Mis, a disastrous run of the musical Carrie led the RSC to stop producing anything other than Shakespeare shows for the next 20 years. With popularity dwindling and the fate of the RSC hanging in the balance, the company finally decided to take another shot at creating a show of their own in 2006. Ironically, with a musical based on a different type of telepathic child named Matilda. Written by Roald Dahl in 1988 and famously adapted into a 1996 film, the story of a smart young girl with abusive parents, a devious teacher, and a deep love for books captured the hearts of generations. Similarly to SpongeBob, a musical adaptation should have never worked. The creative team included an edgy playwright, a raunchy Australian comedian who'd never written a musical before, and a director, the only one with some musical experience, who was just coming off a major flop with the Lord of the Rings musical. And yet somehow, they created something magical. Composer Tim Minchin and playwright Dennis Kelly both grew up on Roald Dahl. The lighthearted humor with a macabre twist living in the duo's DNA. When writing the script, Kelly stuck exclusively to Dahl's original book, refusing to watch the movie out of fear he'd just copy and paste the same beats. The process of writing the show turned into a creative tug-of-war between Kelly and Minchin rather quickly, with director Matthew Warchus silently spectating the debates until eventually hearing one sentence that spoke to him. Originally intended as a limited Christmas-time run at the RSC, Matilda the Musical resonated with audiences so well that it transferred to the West End and eventually Broadway. Not only did the show include countless high-energy bops like Revolting Children and Bruce, but it was the simple, heartfelt songs that made this piece something special. Songs like Naughty and When I Grow Up managed to both capture the same melancholy spirit of Roald Dahl's books and a genuine sentimentality that could only come from composer Tim Minchin. Designer Rob Howell went all out, littering the set with alphabet tiles and hiding words from the actual Matilda story throughout. A scavenger hunt that actively engaged the audience as soon as they sat down. Matilda the Musical exemplified how the stage can actually elevate an already established IP, and how, in some cases, existing content can serve as a launching pad for something remarkable. But, as previously mentioned, the show needed to overcome countless roadblocks, and everything told here is only about 3% of the full story. Learn the full 100% of the remarkable and impossible journey of making Matilda the Musical by clicking on this video right here.